Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023, 2023, excuse me. And specifically, I'd like to talk about that in the context of a recent box set release, which was made by Criterion about a month or so back. And this is this set, which is focusing on specific works of the filmmaker and artist Pier Paolo Pasolini. And this set is Pasolini 101. And I'd like to speak today about one film which can be found on as part of this Blu-ray collector set, and it is the third, or it can be found on the third Blu-ray disc. This is a film which is described as being from the year 1964, and it is a film which is directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. And the name of the work, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the Italian language, I hope you can forgive me, but the name of the work is Comizi d'amore, or as it's known in English, Love Meetings. This is the work which is described as being from the year 1964, and it is a type of, say, documentary, or it could be described as Pier Paolo Pasolini himself going to various parts of Italy, many parts of Italy throughout, and speaking with many people that he is able to meet, interviewing them essentially on the spot, on the streets, in cafes, outside places of work, and also speaking with people on trains, also speaking with academic scholars and writers about the philosophy of this film. And that is essentially a discussion of various aspects of sex and society and the law and economics and roles in terms of perceived notions of quote-unquote morality, perceived notions of sex and the law, and daily living in terms of the institution, the institutionalization of aspects related to sex, such as marriage, and also in perhaps the same breath, divorce. Also the idea of what it means to have a type of sexual fidelity or faithfulness. What does it mean to have, say, what is the concept of sex and morality, and how that plays into aspects of, say, quote unquote conservative or quote unquote traditional, whatever those mean, aspects or viewpoints about sex and sexuality versus quote unquote modern viewpoints of sex and sexuality and morality and modernity, whatever, and I use air quotes there to describe those because these are all very much possibly dependent on a type of subjective viewpoint and also generational viewpoint, and also touching upon, say, recent movements in Italian legislation or legislative history. A reference to Merlin law is described, and if you read the great essay by James Quandt and elsewhere, I'm not a scholar or history student when it comes to, or an expert when it comes to Italian history and the history of Italian legislation, so I had to rely on James Quandt essay to let me know or to inform me about the effect of what is referred to as the Merlin law, and it's spoken about in one of the parts of this great kind of documentary or interview sessions, or maybe an approach on sex and society, love meetings. Merlin law is the legislation that banned bordellos. So we see a lot of commentary and questions, again, to ordinary people. And for the most part, anyway, ordinary people in terms of livelihood and spanning all strata of society. and from young, old, from various walks of life, and maybe from academia, from students to people who are working daily lives, daily jobs, people who are raising families, who are with children, and also interviewing children and kids as well, speaking in terms about children, adults, and elderly people is also across the board. Trying to get a type of survey into perceptions and attitudes and concepts about sex and morality and education and legislation and the law and religion and marriage and prostitution and ideas about sex and reproduction and quote unquote what are sort of maybe quote unquote the realms of normalcy end quote, and the idea of things that are quote unquote abnormal. And I use air quotes here as well because, again, Pasolini allows for his participants, the interviewees, to express themselves in their what we understand to be the very likelihood of their expressing their true feelings about these and other questions. And so we have these various questions posed to these people, and the questions are being posed by Pasolini himself. He is out there with a type of microphone or a recording device, and we hear his voice, and we can maybe those who are astute enough in the audience will maybe recognize that maybe it's sort of dialogue or a narrative that's recorded, but then is applied after the fact. But it's nonetheless his voice, and we see and we hear the question and response sessions. With this is really great. This is great for so many reasons. So it is very much through and through a Pasolini film. And if we remember, one of the great attributes of, say, a work like Acatone from 1961 or a work like Mamma Roma from 1962, and indeed those two films being films number 1 and number 2 respectively, in the order of the Blu-ray discs in Pasolini 101, Love Meetings being number 3 here. And what's great in terms of that progression is that we are reminded when we see Love Meetings that Pasolini has an interest in quote unquote the notions and the emotions and the opinions of everyday people. And this could be said to have found expression in earlier films like Acatone and Mamma Roma in his focus on working classes and in his focus on quote unquote the downtrodden end quote. This is definitely true of the main character of Acatone in the first film. This is definitely true of Mamma Roma and her character arc and dynamic in the second film. And when we see Pasolini question and go out to the street and question many people from all walks of life, young, old, various aspects of daily living, social strata, and the like. This is very much, again, focus on the individual, on the human being, and on the people, which I find to be very, shall I say, for lack of a better phrase, a type of socio-political democratization of the filmmaking process. And I think that's very much inherent in the films of Pasolini, at least as we've seen so far. And Love Meetings is a great prime example of this. Also, what's great is that, and it's something that I've remarked upon a little bit in other films, but again, we get a sense too of his insistence and his emphasis on various geographical areas. We've gotten a sense in particular in, say, a discussion of his literary background, his poetry, when we get to some of the supplements and the discs that we've seen so far, about how Pasolini is very tuned to language, and also he's very tuned to dialects. And this was referred to in some of the supplements about dialects in his poetry, especially in his early poetry. Again, that is a reminder of many things, one of which being how much he is interested in many parts and many people's opinions throughout the entirety of Italy, not just one region, which is why I'll have scenes of people, in Venetian settings, University of Bologna, or Sicily, or Neapolitan settings, or factories, Milanese persons' factories, Venetian areas, etc. So all walks of life, and one of the things that I understand is a very common way of viewing the socio-political history of Italy, especially in the 19th and 20th century, is the divide between, quote unquote, the North and the South. And I know perhaps I'm oversimplifying this, but the point is that even the film Love Meetings and Pasolini do make reference to this, about how there are certain viewpoints expressed in the interviews of people in the geographical areas, say in the North, that are markedly, say, similar or different when you get to similar interviews that Pasolini has with people in the southern regions of the country. So, and this forms, again, a really interesting trajectory of the discussions of Love Meetings, and the idea of attitudes that differ, say, depending on or pursuant to perhaps the geographical region of the area. And that also is linked to not just a socio-political culture, but also language and economy. And also we get linked to that, or maybe as a transition to and from that, say, discussions from people who are working on farms, say students who are in, students at among the top universities in the country, and also people who are, say, in their teenage years, other people who are, raising families, other people who are in working classes in society in their adulthood years, people who are retired, or people who are in, say, middle classes or upper classes, academics, etc., and all walks of life. And so, I mean, this type of focus on various individual, say, backgrounds, I think, is also giving rise to many formulations of thought and opinion. And I don't think that, I mean, there are moments where I think Pasolini, through his narration, seems to try to engender or try to derive a type of, say, hypothesis for the case about certain attitudes on sexuality and sexual, quote unquote, norms, end quote, and also perceptions of sex and class and economics and the legal system, etc. How these could be said to be perceptions that are very much geographically linked, although, and these comments I think are voiced in some of the narration moments of the film by Pasolini himself, although I think it can be said in the same breath that Love Meetings almost defies that hypothesis by suggesting that there are many different viewpoints and opinions. For example, there are quote unquote conservative viewpoints and also quote unquote modern viewpoints that are expressed by people within the same region throughout the film. And so that itself seems almost to fly in the face of any type of verbalized hypothesis about geographical, say, underpinnings of any types of formulations of ideas. But I think that hypothesis still holds a lot of water, because one of the things too that's very key in a film like Love Meetings is how it's very much linked to economy and economics, and there is a very strong distinction and divide, and in fact have a characteristic, economically based characteristics, that can be said to be linked to, say, the northern part of Italy and the southern part of Italy. And the discussion of sex does turn into sex and economics, and about how expressions of sex, say expressions of sex in terms of gender roles, is also linked to expressions of sex as forms of, say, economic liberty, and also well-being, a type of class mobility, which we found having voice in, say, films like Acatone, but perhaps quite prominently in a film like Mamma Roma, which was the disc prior to this third disc. So this is very fascinating itself. Also, there's this frankness about sex and a discussion of sex and sexuality that I think will lead to other Pasolini films where sex and literature, sex and art are linked, sex and economics are linked, sex and class are linked, sex and gender roles are linked, sex and quote-unquote morality are linked, sex and religion are linked, etc. Sex and the law are linked in future films, such as, say, Oedipus Rex, or Porcile, or Teorema, or Hawks and Sparrows, which we'll talk about in the context of this Pasolini 101 set, and even beyond the Pasolini 101 set, when we're talking about, say, the films, say, in the Trilogy of Life sequence, or even a work like Salo, 120 Days of Sodom. And so this film, Love Meetings, can be said to be a documentary, can be said to be an interview, say, sequence, or a type of an attempt to characterize or discover the attitudes of sex in the context of the Italian society writ large. And it's also almost a celebration of the way in which Pasolini really values and honors and loves to hear the viewpoints and opinions of, quote unquote, the ordinary people, which is, again, very much inextricably linked to his voice and style that we've seen thus far anyway in his two films, Acatoni and Mamma Roma. And while at the same time giving us varied viewpoints and sort of this very transformative and difficult and very fluid and even circular concept and notion of what sex is in society. And this is really important. This is very important because sex as expression, sex as art, or sex as linked to art, and also various viewpoints about sex and morality and how that leads to, say, freedoms and sexuality and prostitution and the outlawing of bordellos and the application of legislation. It's all connected, and I think that's part of what Pasolini's point is in many of his films. You know, how sex is it's sometimes perceived by certain viewpoints as having a very moral character. And that also has its maybe antecedents in, say, works of art and literature, etc., and poetry, which I think Pasolini acknowledges and recognizes. But also Pasolini, in the same breath, acknowledges and recognizes how there's also a type of utilitarian aspect to sex, which is very much class-linked and economic-linked, and also gender-based, or it also has its, say, various permutations in the context of gender roles. And it's also in perceived morality, social mores, whatever that means, whether objective or subjective. And also there is a wonderful way in which certain ideas about sex and marriage and institutionalized aspects related to sex, and also feelings and emotions and the psychological reactions and effects of sex, happiness, sadness, a type of satisfaction, the feeling, the joy of sex, as expressed by many people across the board here in this series of interviews, Love Meetings, as well as attitudes towards sex and attitudes towards even down to very minute details of power plays in relationships, intimate relationships, and how sex is used to maybe inform how we perceive ourselves, whether we think of ourselves as confident in terms of games involving sex, or confident in terms of attracting people that we want to attract in terms of sexual intimacy, etc. Or is there something else going on? And so this is, I think, a full-bodied examination of society and norm, quote unquote, sexual norms, end quote. And again, I use air quotes and quotation marks here because, again, these are very fluid discussions. These are very, and they're very much tied to the individual opinion. And so there are some opinions here that are voiced that are very much because of the person's background or the person's, say, perspectives. And we have varying viewpoints that are expressed all within the running time of this great work, Love Meetings. So I think this is such a key work, and I'm very glad the Comiti d'Amore, and I apologize for my poor pronunciation of the Italian language, but I hope you can forgive me. But Comiti d'Amore, I think its handling and treatment as in the context of the filmography of Pasolini, I think is so key and so important for the reasons that I've tried to express here, namely in terms of its handling and treatment of the subjects that are being, the people that are being interviewed, and how this is, I think, a great expression of Pasolini's art and philosophy, and also how this film figures into the whole filmography body of Pasolini writ large, as well as being such a fascinating insight and look into various viewpoints and attitudes towards sex, as expressed here in this film, which is Love Meetings. The Criterion Collection has released Love Meetings in the context of Pasolini 101 in this Blu-ray set. This is on the third disc, Blu-ray disc number 3. And I have the disc in the machine here, and you can see 003. I'm sorry, maybe you can't, I apologize. It's out of focus, but it does say 003 in the context of this Blu-ray menu for Love Meetings, Comizi d'Amore. This is, again, described as being from 1964, black and white mono, sound in Italian with English subtitles, 1.85 to 1. And the booklet, which is I have right here, in the latter pages has information about the masters and about Love Meetings. It says, and I quote, "This 4K restoration was undertaken by the Cineteca di Bologna in association with Compass Film at l'Immagine Ritrovata from the 35mm and 16mm original camera and sound negatives, etc." So I think that that description about the use of the materials, 35mm and 16mm, I think does perhaps suggest certain, say, maybe restoration-related detailed differences that one can note when one watches this film in the context of this presentation. So I think for the most part I was very happy with this presentation, although I must say that there were some, not many, but some moments where the black and white graininess of the film appeared very, very grainy, you know, the kind of almost dot pixel-like look, which can be said to be described as grain. Has a very digitized look in some of the scenes, especially some of the outdoor scenes. Not with all the scenes, but with some of them. And I think that can be attributed to maybe the underlying 16mm materials that were used as the basis for, say, those moments. So not all, but sometimes it has a grainy look where the graininess seems overly digitized to my eyes. And I found it almost to the point of being somewhat distracting. But it wasn't too distracting because I was able to enjoy the film as an overall experience because it's such a great film. But it does occur to me maybe once in a while that type of graininess seems to be overly digitized. Again, I'm relying on my very non-professional, non-technical, say, use of words here, and I apologize, but it does occur. Now, I must say that it occurred infrequently, and it didn't occur throughout. I mean, there are moments that have a crispness and a wonderful sense of, say, solidity, which I find very, very welcoming indeed. But there are other moments that do feel you get a sense of the grain, and even where you get a sense of the grain as a type of digitized look, it looks okay. But there are moments here and there where it does look overly digitized. So I just keep that in mind. But it doesn't take away from the overall experience of watching this film, and those moments are few and far between for me anyway. And then for the most part, the presentation was a very pleasant one for me indeed. So there are some things, maybe minor reservations I have that I just tried to express here, but overall, I found the viewing experience and the sound experience to be overall a pleasant watch indeed. And then moving on to the supplements, which you can find on the supplements submenu of this Blu-ray disc, and I pressed it there. And again, I apologize for the out of focus look. I'm very bad with my presentation skills, as you can see, so I apologize for that. But it says there are 3 supplements. First is notes for a Creto film, and if I press on that, it says, in this short documentary made by Maurizio Ponzi in 1967, Pasolini offers a concise yet illuminating explanation of his cinematic grammar, drawing on his regular collaborator Ninetto Davoli and scenes from love meetings to illustrate examples of his larger artistic worldview. And this is approximately 13 minutes. And this is really great because the Criterion Collection describes it here, it does rely on certain scenes from love meetings. It also is an opportunity for Pasolini to express himself in his own words, his idea and notion of what cinema is, the language of action. Cinema reproduces the language of action, and there are quotes and acknowledgments to other filmmakers such as Dreyer, such as Charles Chaplin, such as Godard. I really love this because it does go into this idea of quote-unquote reality and quote-unquote fiction, which is also hinted at in another supplement, which we'll talk about momentarily. But and that goes into the very heart and the essence of the discussion of the acceptance and rejection in the same breath of, say, neorealism tendencies of cinema, which I think go at the very heart and soul of, say, the use of metaphor versus the use of applications of quote-unquote realism. And that mix and that blend is oh so Pasolini. And so that's a great description. And so the idea of what cinema is to him is a very important one indeed. So please check out this supplement if you can. It's great. It's approximately 13 minutes. And then next is Varda meets Pasolini. And this is described by Criterion as two icons of cinema link up on the streets of New York City in this portrait of Pasolini, shot by filmmaker Agnes Varda in 1967. And this is indicated to as having been restored in 2022, which is great. It looks great and it sounds great. It's approximately 4 minutes. It's in New York City circa 1967, and we see Pasolini on the streets of the city. And we hear the sort of voiceover discussion in French between Varda and Pasolini. As we hear these words, we see shots of Pasolini on the street, which again we assume was shot by filmmaker Varda. When we hear his discussion about what he thinks about New York City, he mentions the perceptions of poverty, the idea too of reality and fiction in cinema, which we alluded to in a discussion of the earlier supplement, and Varda questions are asked about whether he's relying on religion, themes and motifs of religion, and he responds, for him it's not religion per se, but references to Italian paintings, etc., and works of art. And so this is great. This is a really great, it's brief, it's a type of portrait of the artist in New York, in a manner of speaking, and also it's a reminder too of the greatness that is the works of Agnes Varda. And Agnes Varda and Pasolini are meeting here. So Varda meets Pasolini in this work. It's a 4-minute or so work that has been restored. It looks great. It sounds great. It's fantastic. So please check this out if you can. Again, circa 1967. And then the supplements are rounded out with a trailer. So as you can see, we don't get any, say, commentary track or anything like that, or anything beyond these supplements here. It would have been nice to have a commentary track, or it would have been nice to have other, say, supplements specific to love meetings, etc. But I think that's okay. That's okay. While I would have liked to see more, or perhaps have seen a new commentary track, I'm still okay with what we got. And again, the connection with these two cinematic icons, Varda and Pasolini, as well as a further insight into what cinema means to Pasolini in the first supplement. I mean, this is really well worth it. So please check out these supplements if you can, including the trailer. And then let me now turn our attention to the booklet again. This is a really great booklet, and we'll talk more about the cover art design choices of the box set, which are also really great and interesting, and then a further discussion on the comprehensive aspects of this booklet. But there is a love meeting specific essay. Actually, before I get to that, I should again remind everyone that this is housed in this sort of hardbound disc storage system. And love meetings would go on this sleeve here. If the disc is not here at the moment, because actually the disc is currently in the machine, and so that's why it's not in the sleeve here. But it would go there as part of the storage system for this box set, and we'll talk about it, overall aspects of this box set in a separate video. But I do want to point out that this booklet has write-ups on each of the films by James Quandt, including a write-up on love meetings starting on page 40. This is great. I am admittedly not a scholar or historian or student of history of Italian, say, politics or Italian socioeconomic history of the 1960s. So I don't have all this information under my belt. So when I watch love meetings, I'm very much a novice. I'm very, very much a novice in terms of this. So James Quandt's essay, among other things, presents some of the historical background of what is on the forefronts of people's minds when Pasolini is interviewing them here. So that is really important. I mean, as I mentioned before as an example, the Merlin Law is referenced by some of the interviewees here. They mention their reaction to or their feelings against the Merlin Law. But what is the Merlin Law? If without any context, it might be difficult to say, because I don't think the film goes into. It's not like a step-by-step overview of Italian history, political history of the 1960s, but it's really an on-the-ground assessment of attitudes towards sex from the viewpoints of many people across Italian society. So it's not a survey, or it's not meant to be a survey of Italian political history. But with that being said, you do get great details about those contextual points in places like James Quandt's essay here. So this is really great. This is really, I mean, so far I've been so happy with James Quandt's essays. But this essay on love meetings is wonderful. I mean, I watched the film and I read the essay by James Quandt, and then I want to watch the film again because now I get more of the points, and then I want to read the essay again. So it has that wonderful cyclical nature, which, the best Criterion essays do that. And I think this is one of my favorites in the book so far. So well done, James Quandt, for these excellent write-ups, including that for love meetings. So that's my appeal to you, my dear friends, to watch all the films in the set and read the great essays, including that for love meetings. It's fantastic. So my dear friends, that concludes my comments on this film, Love Meetings, in the context of the Criterion box set release, and also in the context of the filmography of Pier Paolo Pasolini. So, my dear friends, let us end the conversation here for the time being. We will pick this up again in a separate video with regard to the next film in the set, Pasolini 101. But until the next video, my dear friends, please continue to be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including the films in Pasolini 101, including Love Meetings, including the films beyond, here, there, and everywhere. So please continue to enjoy your cinematic journey, and please continue to be happy and healthy and well. And as I say, please continue to watch a lot of great movies. And so until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.